So, Doc, what is the trick to getting motivated when I am not motivated? Like, I am on the couch and I don't want to get up and I don't want to do anything. Like, what helps me to start to get into that motivated state where I want to do the things that I want to do? Like, I have all these ideas. I'm a creative person and I want to be able to follow through on that. But man, I just start to get in my own way because I don't have that drive to go for it. What do you do with that? Well, if you're wondering about this, keep listening. Welcome. This is how to fix your sucky life. That's right. Maybe you're somebody who says, so life sucks. Now what, right? Fix me, Doc. I don't know what to do with all of this. This is a podcast that teaches anybody who's interested in learning a little bit more about how to get control of the anxiety in their life, the stress in their life, all of those feelings that are bogging you down. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie Marr, a clinical psychologist of the last 2 decades and a trauma therapist. And I'm here to help you understand how things early in our life, things like trauma or really difficult times, impact us later in life, so much so that it drives us off course and into patterns that are not helping us. They don't serve us and they create suffering for us. And there's a lot of information swimming out there. So I know that people are looking to feel better and want to know what works. Why don't we help you fix that sucky life? I take all of the information from neuroscience, my experience over the last 2 decades, and all the fits and starts of my own personal life, and I put it all together in a toolbox for you so that you can stop just surviving and learn how to really thrive in your life. I know it's possible to get there, so let's get started. Welcome back, everybody. We are here at Life Sucks. Now what? One of the reasons why life can suck, well, it's when we're not motivated. It's definitely when we're kind of in a funk about things. And sometimes that just happens naturally, right? Like, I just had in my own family, one of my siblings, I'm a middle child of 5 kids. And one of my siblings, and we're all like, we're up there now. Like, we're not young spring chickens anymore. And one of them is going through a layoff. They've worked at the same company for 12 years. And goodness sake, I mean, think about that. Like, that's just over a decade. And that's a lot of time to put into a job. And you're in, like, this is when you like know your stuff and you're the go-to person and like people like you. And just to get that pink slip, it's terrible. It's a terrible place to be. And in this economy, companies are doing it. And so here, this sibling of mine is in that boat. And she and I were having this conversation the other day about, what do you do? What do you do when you have no motivation to want to go find another job now, right? Like, what do you do when you're just coming off the back end of feeling like you were rejected and like jump in and be excited about, let's go do this thing over here. Like, that's really hard. I mean, I have actually had multiple clients over the course of my life with similar circumstances. Like, how do you get yourself revved up to do something when you're really not coming from that place? Well, some of the neuroscience is interesting because motivation definitely is tied to the dopaminergic system. Dopamine is kind of a neurotransmitter it gives us our oomph, right? It likes to chase and pursue stuff. It likes to, it gets flowing when we're looking for the next hit of sorts. Now, it's also the neurochemical that can get us into trouble and more into addictive cycles in our life. But, when it's operating at its optimum, it is part of the neurochemistry that gets us motivated. And let me just tell you, you're in the basement with that during a time that you just had a major hit in your life. Like, gosh, job loss, like that. I mean, you're a provider for your family. There's all sorts of levels to this. So it isn't just not being motivated. It's feeling pretty demoralized and having to come from that space because life circumstances aren't going to, afford you anything else, coming from that space and having to move on and be motivated to do something else. So how do you do that, Doc, right? Well, one of the things that I talk to people about when they're in this case scenario. It's something I even shared with my sister is you got to anchor yourself to some kind of why. You do. You have to come back to something that is still motivating, even though most things aren't. And so if your why is something in this case, like your family, then you have to come back to that. It has to be something that you anchor yourself to give yourself clarity on why you're going to push yourself to do something when you don't want to do it. But there's also some biohacks. So let's talk about it. There are some ways to generate dopamine in your body if you're a little low on that, right? There's some ways to generate serotonin, which would be another of the neurochemicals that I would tell you you probably need. And so what I would suggest is that you biohack that for yourself, that you start to introduce forms of self-care that get you in that mindset, right? So it just so happens that my sister is in construction management. She's, done building and electrical work. And I mean, this woman like remodeled my basement when I was in my 20s. And so like she's been doing this forever and ever and ever. And, I think that for her, those kinds of activities, like she's, built cabinetry before, like literally from the ground up, are her creative work, right? That's her, what I would call her right brained work. So our left brain is more of our language based, analytical kind of. There's, step 1, 2, and 3 side of our brain. And a lot of us live there a lot of the time. Like American culture really reinforces that for us. Social norms reinforce that for us. Our families sometimes do. There's lots of reasons why we live on that side of our brain. But the creatives of the world are, using and accessing more of their right side of their brain. And the thing that happens is when we are trying to fix a problem, but we're in the problem, the focusing on it can actually be part of what's disrupting our ability to see the answer to it. And so the way to biohack that is to get in your right side of your brain. And the beauty of doing creative work is it gets you on that right side of the brain, but it also starts to kind of recharge that dopaminergic system. Think about this. If, I tell my sister, why don't you go pick up a couple jobs, do a couple, bathroom remodels for some friends or something. What will happen is she'll be going to do that activity. And in doing that activity, she'll be using her right brain. She'll be using her left brain too, because she does measure and measures twice. I got her a really cool gift this last holiday season where you can push it up against really awkward edges and you can get a perfect awkward edges, and then you get a perfect line of what you have to cut out of flooring or whatever you're pushing up against that weird edge. But if she's doing that, that's her creative work, right? Like she's going to see a beginning, middle, and end. And she, in that chase, is going to start to regenerate that dopaminergic system. It's going to be great for her, honestly. But she's also going to be more in her right brain than her left brain. So instead of like stewing on, and what do I do? And I need my resume and I blah, 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 all the things that we start to think about when we've had to go through a layoff and had to find a new job and had to do so later in life. All of the worrying, gets kind of put on hold for a second. And that creative side of our brain starts to rejuvenate our motivational system. And so this was a conversation she and I had. I was like, I think that you need to get into doing some of that stuff, whatever that is for you, during the time, after you're laid off and before you find your new employment. What'll happen during that time is it'll allow her brain to go offline enough that she'll start to make associations that she wouldn't if she stayed too focused on it. I'm going to give you an example of how this comes up for you. Have you ever lost something, like put down your keys and didn't know where you did? I know you've done this. And what happens when you get more and more obsessed and emotional about finding that thing? Can't find it. Even if it's something just irritating, like you are trying to think of a word and you can't come up with it. And you're like racking your brain. What's that word? Or what was the name of that actor? Or, whatever. What's the name of that movie or song? So you're focusing so hard on that one thing. it's the only thing that's not going to pop into your brain. I promise you. In fact, you might feel like you go totally blank. Well, this is a similar perspective. I want you to turn your right brain on. I want you to go do something in that creative realm and see a beginning, middle, and end so that you can biohack getting a little bit more dopamine and getting your dopamine system working again when it was in the basement, kind of pulling it up at least to the first floor by doing some of those activities. Serotonin, on the other hand, serotonin is an interesting neurotransmitter. It does lots of things, but one of the things that, when we're engaging in forms of self-care, when we're thinking about that, is I think it interfaces well with another neurochemical, which is oxytocin. Oxytocin is our social chemical. It's, when we're falling in love, we're flooded with it. When we're out with our friends laughing, we're flooded with it. But even if you go and hug your cat, you get a little bit of it, right? So oxytocin is a great short-acting little boost here and there. And of the neurochemicals, it's the one that kind of is a front runner for really pulling you out of the dumps. And so there's a little bit of that I'd like, my sister to biohack right now. So we're all kind of hanging out with her and helping her out and figuring out what's going to be next. And serotonin is more of a neurochemical that is looking at feeling like you're important, like you're in alignment with what you want in the world, and that you feel like you're in your purpose and you're serving the greater need of what you want. And so when you think about dopamine and you think about serotonin in conjunction with one another, serotonin is more of a long-acting, sustainable neurochemical that kind of helps us stay motivated after the motivation originally, kind of keeps us in place, right? And dopamine is kind of the one that kind of pushes us into place. So it's hard to get yourself going when you don't have enough dopamine. And so thus the biohack that I've already discussed. But if you can get into starting something, what will happen is you'll start to build up your serotonin if it's in alignment with where you want to be right now. So if I asked you to go and draw in coloring books, it would help with the dopamine, but it wouldn't help with the serotonin. But serotonin bumps up against a few of these other neurotransmitters. So if my sister goes to help and remodel her friend's basement, she's getting that dopamine push because she's doing the creative thing. She's seeing her friends, so she's getting that oxytocin. And long term, she's also starting to kind of tap into her serotonergic system and feel like, oh yeah, like I love my people and I want to make my people happy, and this makes me feel happy. And this is something I'm good at, and I feel good about like being able to take my zone of genius and help somebody with it. And so all of those systems start to go, and you start to kind of use them to propel you to continue to go forward. So there's kind of this synergy of, it's not just a motivation thing. When you're in the basement, it's not really about just getting yourself going. It's about sustaining movement once you get going. And once in motion, we stay in motion, right? Because then we're getting all of those other neurochemicals. But what I would really suggest, if this is something that's happening in your life and you're really feeling stuck with something, is start with doing a creative activity that's in alignment with something that you feel is your zone of genius, the place, where you're fulfilling your life purpose. For me, doing podcasts like this is like that. I'm not making a dime. In fact, I'm spending time. And so time is money. And that means, this comes at a cost to me. And yet it's so wonderful for me. And it's in my zone of genius. It's a place where I get to just be a talking head and share some of my knowledge that I've created over the last couple of decades, probably more than that when you think about it, because I draw on even my own life experience with this stuff. So, when I'm doing this, it's a right brain activity, and it's kind of juicing the wheels of that dopaminergic system so that I can stay motivated with things like going home and doing the dishes, because I don't like to do the dishes. But if I stay up on top of the dishes, I really like when my life feels like it's all in the place it needs to be. And that's more serotonergic than it is dopaminergic. So one is kind of helping the other, right? So I would start with finding a creative activity and doing that. Get yourself going, right? But have that activity be in alignment with who you are in the world. Now, if you're struggling with that, maybe you'll want to listen to the next podcast, because I'll talk a little bit more about finding purpose and finding meaning in life when you feel like life gets a little meaningless. But If you're somebody who knows what that is, or is just, kind of playing around with it and staying curious, which then means you're where you need to be, learning what that will be for you, then I would suggest tying it to an activity like that. And once you've got that going, incorporate some element of your social support system, incorporate friends, family, sharing it with them, showing them what your work is, or doing something for them, in service to them. Because definitely when you pull all of those together, you can really start to reset your nervous system away from the funk that it was in with whatever assaulted it, So for my sister, that was a layoff. We're going to help her get to a point where she is just ready and raring to find what the next exciting step is going to be in her career. But, it's okay to be upset in the beginning part of it and hear, some of your neighborhood friendly psychologist's ideas for what you can do to help yourself get going again. I'd also just like to mention, though, it's okay. It's okay to be sad and grieve that loss too, because an important aspect of this also isn't just about like getting out of the funk and moving forward, although those are important ways to heal in the process. You also want to turn towards your feelings. You don't want to not acknowledge that this was a really difficult thing. And so part of what we've been doing for my sister as well is just kind of like, yeah, this sucks, like sitting in that. And I've suggested she might want to talk that through with a therapist for a little while because, it brings up a lot of stuff for us. So always remember that it's kind of a paradox, right? We're holding space for the negative in our life while we're also incorporating other things, alternative things that are helping us move forward. Humans are pretty complicated. Humans are pretty amazing, which is why I became a psychologist, but humans are pretty complicated. And so I'm always reminding my clients and, you now, my podcast audience, I'm always reminding like, just give yourself some space to just be human sometimes. It's okay to have the feels. We don't always have to push against and try to run away from those uncomfortable feelings. In fact, turning towards uncomfortable feelings is sometimes the best way that we can manage them. Because I am a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Minnesota, I need to be sure that you understand this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and it is not a replacement for any mental health or medical therapy, counseling, or other treatments. I also want to be sure that if you are in crisis, that you seek out help. So I'm going to share with you here 2 different resources that you might use for yourself or someone else you know that's close to you in crisis. The first is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. You can find them at suicidepreventionlifeline.org online, or pick up the phone and dial 988. And you can talk to somebody right away if you're in crisis. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't like to pick up the phone to talk to somebody directly, there is also a crisis text line. You can find them at crisistextline.org online, or you can text HOME to 741-741, and you'll reach somebody right away to help you in crisis. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and I strongly encourage that you like and follow us wherever you find your podcasts. Share us if you like an episode and think somebody could use that information, and certainly leave a review if you feel like there's something that really resonated for you. It helps me when I see those reviews to make sure to have relevant material on the podcast that you want to hear about.